I remember the day before my dad disappeared. Me and my father, what we've always shared, was driving around in his car, talking about life, about anything. This was our thing. Driving in the car, listening to Queen songs. I want to break free. Checking out some spots over our hometown with a great view. The day before he disappeared, we took a very particular route towards the mountains. A beautiful spot. April 2011. I was 19 years old. And then he disappeared. My father was always a strong person with strong opinions. He had a sense for justice, a working class hero, someone who wanted to fight for others, speak up, and speak his truth. And we loved to play tennis and golf together. And he was very passionate about hunting, politics, and business. I always perceived him as a very hard character. But he could be loving too. He always tried to express his love to me and my younger brother in small gestures. When we were driving in the car, he would reach back for my hand, just to show his affection. I always felt, though, my father didn't develop the confidence to pursue his ambitions. He never had the same opportunities my generation had, because back then, things were much more of a struggle. A big part of his suffering came from his upbringing. Unfortunately, his father, my grandfather, passed away very young from cancer. So my dad became the caretaker of the family, looking after his sister, his 3 younger brothers, and his mother too. He must have been in his early 20s. It was a lot of responsibility, and to be honest, I don't know how he did it. So he could never do what he wanted to do because he had to be there for others. And these unfulfilled dreams were like a lifelong shadow he always carried with him. Or maybe he was not brave enough to do what he wanted to do. Perhaps there was too much insecurity and angst embedded in his upbringing. He was ashamed of this insecurity. As I told you, he wanted to be a strong person. Maybe people taught him to be a strong person, not asking for help. So he refused to put himself in a weak spot. And all of this led to a toxic cocktail of youth, upbringing, insecurity, responsibility, the heavy burden. Maybe all of this was not real, but in his mind it was real. And it even got more real and more dominant over the years. At some point, he was on a downward spiral. And this is essentially where his depression kicked in. As a teenager, I always felt my father was holding me back with his fear that something bad could happen. If you always think what could happen, you can never be free. I remember one evening in Munich, I was on a date with a girl, and I forgot to tell my parents. And we hung out all night, and I didn't call them when I went back home, because, well, I never went back home. My father starts to call me. I don't pick up, because I don't want to be embarrassed in front of the girl, right? I knew I was okay. But back home, my father completely lost it. He was ready to jump in the car and drive all the way to Munich just to see if I'm okay. He couldn't escape those kind of frightening imaginations. I was okay, but in his mind, I could have been murdered in Munich or something. By me living my life, I had brought so much sorrow and pain to my dad. Even the happiest of moments I could never fully enjoy. There was always this bittersweet aftertaste. When my father had depression, it was like he was dismantling, falling apart. I remember the weakness of his body. He was no longer strong physically. Once I took his hand, and it was so weak and soft. This once so strong hand. And I think I already knew, and he knew even more. There was a dark force. At some point, my mom said we need to escape the spiral, but we could not find the escape route. My father already had an idea, an anticipation, something you can almost smell that is in the air. And I think I already knew. And then he disappeared. That day, I was working at my aunt's shop, selling cigarettes and magazines like I always did during a semester break. And I was happy to be there, to get a change of scenery, some fresh air, because things back home were so tense. I'd had a harsh argument with my mom, which was weird, because before that, I was always fighting with my dad, and my mom would be the one to smooth things over. My mom remains there for us until this day. She never collapsed, and she is the heart of our family. But back then, she was at the point where she couldn't deal with it anymore. And she screamed, "This is killing us all!" And I screamed back, "Stop it, you're not helping him!" And my father was begging, "Please, please, stop it, stop the fighting. We need to stay together for everything to come." And on that day, the last thing I told him was, "And we will see each other later." He did not reply. But I remember the deep look we shared, now knowing that this was the last time I would see my dad. I came back from the shop and he was missing. I started to call him immediately, 100 times. He did not pick up. And I immediately felt what he must have felt when I was missing in Munich. This was real. We started the search, 20 people, my whole family, the whole day, the whole evening until it got dark. We waited for the night to end. We could not sleep. We even went to the police. They did their procedure, and they informed us that it could be really hard to find him. He could be anywhere. In the morning, I took 2 of my uncles aside, and I told them, I think we should go where I went with him yesterday. And we drove and we drove and we drove. This is very much up the hill. A beautiful spot. So scenic, pastoral, almost peaceful. And then on the top of the hill, I suddenly see the back of his black BMW parked inside a forest. And it hits me like thunder. Like a knife. But it was also a very satisfactory feeling. Like solving a difficult riddle. We did it. We found him. And it immediately occurred to us that someone needs to go in there now. This was a freshly planted forest, maybe 10 years old, just as my brother was back then. One uncle, he went in. He came out and he was completely pale. And I kept asking him again and again, is he still alive? And he answered again, I don't know. I can't tell. And we called my mom and the ambulance and the police, and everybody came. But I couldn't go in there. I was too afraid of seeing him. The brutality of a gun is indescribable. He was a hunter. He knew what he was doing. A gun is something supposedly quick, but then at the same time, the sheer force that you're turning towards yourself. Brutal. Almost like a statement. I want to erase myself. I know my dad wanted me to find him, not to be lost forever. He put himself there very consciously, just for me. This was his last message. I don't want to be lost forever. I want to be found by my son. And this is how we discovered him. But rest assured, only because my father disappeared, it doesn't mean he was gone. In the hours and days after his death, his words, his message was still with me. Almost like he was speaking from a distant place, beyond the river, from another world. And he said something like this: you're very special, you have a role in life, and you will do great. And it didn't feel like it was pressure on me. It felt like he was reinforcing a feeling that I have deep inside, a trust. And it felt good to hear it from him. Towards his end, my father got really soft and kind. I didn't realize it back then, but he even apologized for things he said and did when I was growing up. He kind of made his peace. and it felt like a closure, and it gave me confidence that this could be easier. So nothing remained unsaid between me and him. His fear, his angst, his pain was no longer a jail for him, nor for us. Yes, there was a freedom to it when he was gone. A relief, sadly. But one thing my father wanted to make sure was that I knew how much he loved me for who I am. This is his legacy. One thing that I learned from my dad is this: you have to fight for a better world and be brave enough to embrace all the gifts you have inside. Even now, the dead are still talking to us. When I see my sons and my brother, I see my father in them, in words, in moments, in movements, in gestures. Sometimes I smell something, and I remember that my dad once smelled like this. In these moments, he is alive for a second. And it's so hard to talk about these moments, but they're so real, also in your life, if you're brave enough to notice them. Because these moments are a legacy from deep within. And in these moments, it's almost like my dad is breathing through me. The other day, my aunt told me a funny story. She saw me and my dad walking on the street, and we ate one of those sandwiches. And she thought to herself, oh my God, not even the way they walk, the way they bite from this sandwich is a complete copy. And now people say my sons are a copy of me. And this makes me proud and happy because it honors my dad. Or that I have this crooked tooth here. For you, it might be just a crooked tooth, but it's the same my dad had. So for me and my sons, this little crooked tooth is part of our legacy and our pride. Only because my father's life ended by his own hands, I know how overwhelming pain can become. His life reminds me that sometimes breaking a cycle is the biggest inheritance. My father was a great example, but he could not live his example. But rest assured, his message is in his love, not in his loss. Many of you, just like me, are struggling to find your path and way. What do you want your life to be? What do you want to pass on to your children? And what should be left behind? When you go home today, I want you to ask yourself one question. When you die, what will be kept alive? I see a direct lineage from my father to my sons. I simply want them to be better than me, to live the life they want, to be brave and borderless and believe in what they can do. And I don't want them to walk this earth, and when they're gone, it's like they've never been here. And I want to remember and honor my dad, to show the world this man was alive. He was important. And he is loved. And I would like to tell him, to me, he was always enough. He didn't have to be a fighter. He didn't have to be strong. He always was. And he always will be my hero. And most of all, I would love him to see my sons just for once. And I know this would bring him so much joy. So much joy. And every once in a while, I catch a glimpse of my dad and my brother and in my sons, in their smiles, in their actions, in their spirit. And in that moment, I am reminded, as I remind all of you, only because you're no longer here, it doesn't mean you're lost. Thank you.